Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to continue with my series of videos on science fiction movies, and for this video we enter into the 1970s, and I'm going to talk about Colossus, the Forbin Project. Just a little bit about the 1970s though before I get into this film, just some very general points to make. The 70s will be a great decade for science fiction. I have about 30 films I want to cover, and you can see the genre really evolve over the decade, but also gain in popularity. Now, the early part of the decade, early 1970s, science fiction movies, very dystopian, and that dystopian continues throughout the decade, but very grim, very almost despairing movies, nihilistic movies we get in the early 1970s, and then we get into the mid 1970s, and science fiction gets a little bit, the dystopian thread is still there, but they get a little bit sillier, a little more satire with science fiction in the mid 70s with movies like The Stepford Wives or Logan's Run. A lot of movies about nature taking over, running amok, a lot of movies like that as well. And then we get into the latter part of the decade where, Star Wars is probably the ultimate dividing point, where we get more space adventures in the late 1970s and even a little bit more optimism as we go into the later part of the decade, although that 70s nihilism kind of continues as a thread through the decade as well. But today I'm going to start out talking about, as I mentioned, Colossus, the Forbin Project. Now, this is an appropriate movie to follow 2001 because this film is also about a supercomputer. The story takes a somewhat different trajectory, though, which is interesting. This movie is based on a novel by D.F. Jones. It was directed by Joseph Sargent, who would mainly be known for his work in television. He did direct the film, I believe, The Taking of Pelham 123 a few years later, a film that's well liked these days. But there is this TV style to this film. It was put out by Universal, and that's not a criticism really, because it has a lot of great camera movement in this movie, and it has a really crisp, confident style to the movie. That the style reminded me a lot of like a Mission Impossible episode from the 60s and 70s. It just kind of has that style to it. So what is this movie about? So movie begins where it stars Eric Braeden, who is a scientist who builds Colossus, the supercomputer, and this computer the charge of nuclear weapons will be put into the hands of Colossus, the computer. And as we start out the movie, the president makes a big announcement about the nuclear weapons will be turned over to a computer, whether you think that's a good idea or not, but they're along with it. And once the computer goes online, strange things start to happen, where first of all they learn that the Soviet Union has their own computer, supercomputer, called Guardian, and what happens is these two computers immediately begin communicating with each other, okay? And as the story evolves, they begin to actually work together and start to kind of take away some of the power from the Soviet and the American governments. The situation continues as the computer gets more sophisticated, where these two computers are trading information to the point where they're starting to exchange mathematical formulas that no human can understand. Okay, so as the story goes on, Colossus, its power keeps growing and growing as the story goes on. It has government people under surveillance and doing all types of things. The government makes a few attempts to try to stop Colossus by deactivating it, like they did with HAL in 2001, but also trying to deactivate the nuclear weapons so the computers can't get a hold of them, but that those attempts also meet with failure. And I will get into spoilers. Basically, what happens in the story is, by the end, Colossus is in complete control, even willing to dish out punishment to the humans who tried to stop Colossus, and takes over the government, takes over everything. Basically, this computer is able to pretty much keep humanity under its thumb. And we have this great trade-off in the ending where Colossus promises peace, an end to hunger, and many other social problems, but at the cost of humans giving up their freedom. Okay, I believe the line is the line in the movie. Yes, we're going to coexist on my terms. Okay, and that freedom has always been an illusion. So it's a great trade-off for a story. Would humanity give up all or some of its freedom for a cure-all to its social problems? I mean, it's an interesting ethical debate to have. And you could argue in this movie that the computer isn't necessarily evil per se. It is trying to make things better for people, but in a way that people don't like, in a way that's kind of antithetical to humanity. The movie's also a play on the old Frankenstein myth of, in this case, Forbin, who played by Eric Braeden, built the computer, and now he finds that his computer has outgrown him in ways that he never could have imagined at all. So it's an interesting technological look at the Frankenstein mythology. And there actually is some humor throughout the movie too, where there's a scene where Braden is trying to make martinis and the computer doesn't know what he's doing, and he has to explain that to Colossus. There's also this idea of surveillance in the movie, and that AI computers being able to monitor human behavior and then chastise human behavior when it breaks the rules. So that's there in the film too. What else? It's also a movie deeply rooted in the Cold War, which may be of less interest today to some viewers, but one thing in the movie I'll point out, there is this interesting idea of cooperation between the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, we're getting into the age of détente, where there is a lessening of tensions and arms control agreements, and kind of a normalization of the Cold War, where the intensity of the 1960s is starting to being de-escalated somewhat. So there is that, and you see that in many other movies in the 70s too. So there is that détente idea in the movie, the two sides working together, which is interesting. Yeah, the movie asks great questions about the nature of freedom and how much we're willing to give up. And the movie, like a lot of these movies, will probably play differently today. Clearly, a lot of the technology, the style in the movie, even the way people act in the movie, will appear dated to today's audiences. It almost has a documentary style to the movie, where it's almost like this is a documentary about the computer, which is interesting. And yeah, it's well acted. It's packed with great TV actors. Eric Braeden would later become famous as a daytime TV star, and but it's just well acted all the way through. Has that documentary feel, but also some prescient themes in this movie. And one of the other things it gets into as well is that is the idea of almost like this spiritual connection with the computer. We hear about this today, where there's some possible cults or religion around AI, and in this film, the computer actually predicts that people might hate me at first, but they will come to view me as some kind of divine figure. Okay, and we get like a little bit of that in the movie where people are wearing T-shirts and almost this mystical atmosphere around attitudes towards this computer that is able to do all these extraordinary things. So it's a movie that's very unnerving on many levels, but also thought-provoking in that the story goes in some directions you might not expect to go. I mean, the world does not explode at the end of this movie like in Doctor Strangelove or something like that. It's a much more nuanced solution to the story, and I think is also like poses a lot of great questions. So that's Colossus, the Forbin Project. A very interesting science fiction film from 1970. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.